Thanks for being with us today on Everyday Grace TV. I know when Mary first pitched the idea of having you on the show, I was definitely intrigued, and I'm sure our viewers are as well. So I'm going to jump right in with the obvious question. How does a pastor come to work at a bar?
Well, Jay, I do love a good contradiction. But I think more specifically that I was in school for so long. So I went from undergrad straight to grad school. And when I got my job at Pullen, I thought, man, I feel like there's just something I've missed out on. There's something to be learned from working not in the same sort of academia, internship kind of stuff.
So the obvious answer was?
The obvious answer was I'm going to work at a bar.
Exactly.
Sort of. I basically realized I did like to hang out in bars, and I met a lot of cool people there, and I thought, why not kind of jump in and start working there and figure out what that would kind of be like. And I didn't have any food service experience, so I kind of went from washing dishes and hosting, making it all the way up to slinging beers. And so it was a good time, and I think I've realized how kind of hard it is to do that job, but also how awesome it is. And so it also gave me some kind of job experience, some variation on sort of what I felt like I could do or be in the world in a way. So, yep.
Good. When we started the show, at the top of the show, we showed some footage that we shot at the farmer's market one day. And I want to ask your opinion. Mary and I talked about it a little bit. But do people's responses to those questions that we asked, does that surprise you at all?
No. I think I think partly because the way the question was phrased, I might have given you a similar response.
I wrote that question. No, I'm kidding.
Not that the question's wrong, Jay, but it might have contributed a little bit to the way people answered. And I only say that because I can imagine, and it could just be my projection, I imagine that the word story for maybe just the average person or just kind of any person might feel really packaged or like really kind of tailored with a bow on it. I mean, we hear story, we think beginning, middle, end, conclusion, some sort of
I've worked on this, I've got it nailed down,
Right. And then the other thing is too, the idea that people would even need to hear that. One, that I would have it worked out, ready to tell, and then that it would be all that important that I would tell it. And so I wasn't super surprised at the video. No.
Okay. So in the work that you do then, let's start with your work as a minister with youth and families. Do you feel like you hear people's stories in that part of your life?
Not probably in a really uncensored kind of way. I think I hear some, but not maybe in a real way. Yeah.
So people are, well, kind of like what you were just saying, people are sort of hiding parts of that story maybe, or I'm going to clean it up before I tell it to you kind of a thing?
Yeah, I think that my title as a minister, I find, can hinder a little bit of that. And it can bring up a variety of things for people. And I find that sometimes I can get more if I delay kind of that title or I sort of meet them just as myself.
Sure. I
feel like I might get a little more from them. But if I do, if my title does kind of lead out in getting to sort of meet them or get to know them, I've found it, at least some of the time, if I'll tell something more vulnerable about my own life, then it might create a little more space. But I still think minister, church, I think a lot of that, for a lot of people, keeps them from telling that kind of uncensored behind the Facebook page.
Create some distance a little bit, a little off-putting. Yeah, okay.
Yep.
So let's look at the other side then of the picture. As a person who works in the service industry, specifically at a bar, do you feel like you hear people's stories in that venue?
I think I hear more of the stories that we're really talking about. I mean, I think this sort of authentic, what has brought them to this space in life and stuff like that. But I don't think that the people that I'm working with or the people that are sitting at the bar, I don't think that they think they're telling the story.
Right. That's not the word that they would use.
I don't think so. So like if I were to spend an hour with someone at the bar just serving drinks or whatever, and they were to walk away and you were to say, how did that feel to tell your story? They would probably go, I don't know what you're talking about. And so I think that it is safer in some ways, but I also don't think that they realize that that is their story and that they are telling their story.
Okay. Well, as Christians, we identify with a story, and it's a story that's beautiful in some places and messy and ugly in other places, but it ultimately leads us to a place of grace and hope. And I would imagine that all of our stories, some of the stories that you've talked about, some of the things that people would not even call stories, it's all pretty much the same. It's all wrapped up in there. And there's beauty, there's ugliness, there's parts that we share, parts that we hide, we don't want people to see. But I think we all have a story that we need to tell. So let's talk about how can we tear down some of those walls? How can we remove some of those barriers that you were talking about earlier and get people to tell their stories or be more comfortable sharing some of those things?
Jay, I think that having a common language is really important. I think that when people have, and it can be a common space, a common language, but when people feel like, at least I feel like I see this, when people feel like they belong, they are much more likely to be comfortable in telling their story. And it comes really naturally, and even sometimes so naturally that they might not even realize that's what they were doing. And so I think whether it's at a bar or whether it's in the consistency of a Sunday school class or if it's in a CrossFit group or really any sort of group where people really feel like, hey, I'm a part of this and I belong here, then I find that we hear a lot more stories and in the real kind of authentic way that I think is most powerful and most transformative.
Yeah. And it's interesting, I'm sitting here thinking about as you're talking, when you say common language and common spaces, in the 21st century, I think that it's wide open what's going to be a common space for people. So I'm glad that you kind of went there. We've been talking with Laura Foley on Everyday Grace TV. We want you to stay tuned. Up next is actor and hairstylist Keegan Dean Rushing.